Have you ever woken up in the morning, stared at the ceiling, and felt that weight on your chest? That feeling that time is passing, the bills keep coming, and the job of your dreams seems further and further away, as if it were a promise made for other people, not for you? If you've ever felt that, I need you to stay with me until the end of this video, because there is a secret that very few people know about the relationship between genuine faith and the manifestation of extraordinary professional opportunities. And this secret doesn't come from a modern guru or from a self-help book. It's hidden in plain sight within the oldest pages in the world. But before I reveal that secret, and I will reveal it, I promise at a specific moment in this video that will completely change the way you see your professional situation, I need to tell you the story of a man who lost everything: the position, the reputation, the freedom, and who, from the darkest moment of his life, activated a principle so powerful that he not only recovered what he had lost, but became the second most influential person in the known world of his time. That man is Joseph. And his story is not just a biblical account, it is a map, a precise blueprint of how faith works as a literal magnet to attract the job, the position, and the purpose that God has already designated for you. There is a law that governs the universe. Quantum physicists call it the principle of resonance. Spiritualists call it the law of attraction. And the Bible calls it faith. When you begin to understand that these three things are describing the same phenomenon from different perspectives, something inside you transforms. Proverbs chapter 23 verse 7 in the King James Version says it with surgical precision. For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. The deeper translation of this verse reveals something that modern science is only now beginning to confirm. You become what you think about consistently, not what you superficially desire, not what you ask for in a moment of desperation, but what your mind processes as truth at the deepest level of your being. And this is exactly where most people fail in manifesting the job of their dreams. They desire the job with their mouth, but believe in scarcity with their heart. Joseph was 17 years old when his father Jacob gave him a special coat, a gift that represented distinction, purpose, and election. But his brothers saw that coat as an affront, as an injustice, and in a moment of blind envy, they sold him as a slave. Think about that for a second. A young man with an enormous dream, with a clear sense of purpose, being torn from his family, chained, taken to a foreign country. If you have ever felt unjustly treated in the workplace, if you were ever passed over for a promotion, laid off without apparent reason, overlooked despite being competent, then you understand, at least in part, what Joseph must have felt in that moment. The difference between Joseph and most people was not in the circumstances. It was in how he interpreted those circumstances. And that difference in interpretation is exactly what separates those who manifest the job of their dreams from those who spend years stagnantly. When Joseph arrived in Egypt and was sold to the house of Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the Bible records something extraordinary in Genesis chapter 39, verse 2, in the King James Version. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man. Notice the sequence. The Lord was with Joseph, and then he prospered. The divine presence came first. The prosperity came after. This is not a literary coincidence. This is the principle of faith operating in its purest form. Joseph did not prosper because the circumstances were favorable. He prospered because he cultivated such a deep connection with the source of all abundance, that source overflowed into every area of his life, including the professional. The law of attraction, seen through the biblical lens, is not about visualizing a new car or repeating affirmations in the mirror. It is about aligning your inner identity with the identity that God has already declared over you. It is about becoming, at the level of being, the version of you that occupies that dream position. But here's something that nobody tells you about the journey of professional manifestation. The path to the job of your dreams almost always passes through a prison. Not necessarily a physical prison, but a prison of circumstances. A period of waiting, of apparent stagnation, of moments when it seems like your prayers are not being heard. Joseph was unjustly accused by Potiphar's wife and thrown into prison. And do you know what the Bible says happened in there? In Genesis chapter 39 verse 21, the King James Version records, "But the Lord was with Joseph, and shewed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Again, the same sequence. The Lord was with Joseph, and the external circumstances were reshaped from that internal presence. The prison did not interrupt Joseph's trajectory. The prison was part of Joseph's trajectory. And the greatest mistake you can make today is to interpret your current phase of waiting, because the truth is exactly the opposite. There is a quantum principle called the collapse of the wave function. Simplified, a subatomic particle exists in multiple simultaneous states of possibility until an observer observes it, and at that moment, it collapses into a specific reality. What physicists discovered is that the act of observing is not passive. The observer actively participates in the creation of the reality they observe. Now read Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 1, in the King James Version. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Biblical faith works exactly like this quantum principle. It collapses possibilities into a specific reality. When you have genuine faith, not anxious hope, not desire mixed with doubt, but inner certainty about what you do not yet see, you are literally participating in the creation of your next professional reality. You are collapsing the wave function of the universe in the direction of your calling. But what is genuine faith when it comes to career and employment? This is where most people make a fundamental mistake. Genuine faith is not pretending everything is fine when it is not. It is not smiling at the camera while your bank account is at zero. It is not denying the reality of your current circumstances. Genuine faith is the ability to maintain your identity as someone blessed, chosen, and capable, even when the external evidence says otherwise. It is the distinction between what you are going through and what you are. Joseph was in prison, but Joseph never became a prisoner in his identity. And that distinction between your temporary situation and your permanent identity is the magnet that attracts the job of your dreams. When I say that faith works like a magnet, I am not using a poetic metaphor. I am describing a real mechanism. Think about how a magnet works. It does not chase after the metal. It does not beg. It does not send resume. It simply exists in its natural state, and the objects that have the right frequency are inevitably drawn to it. When you cultivate genuine faith, when you align your inner identity with who God says you are, you become a magnetic field of opportunities. The right connections appear. The right conversations happen. The right emails arrive. Not because you forced them, but because you became the version of you that naturally resonates with those opportunities. This is what Matthew chapter 6 verse 33 in the King James Version is describing when it says, "But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you." There's a woman I want you to meet. Let us call her Sylvia. At 52 years old, Sylvia had spent 23 years at the same company. She was a project manager, respected by her colleagues, known for her competence. Until one day, during a corporate restructuring, she was called into the director's office and received the news that nobody wants to hear. Her position had been eliminated. With 2 adult children, a mortgage, and a deep sense that her identity was tied to her work, Sylvia collapsed. During the first few months, she sent resume, went to interviews, and heard no over and over again. And each rejection eroded a little more of the confidence she had built over decades. One Sunday morning, she went to church almost out of habit. The pastor preached about Joseph, and something in that message touched a wound so deep that Sylvia cried throughout the entire service. Not from sadness, from recognition. She had identified with Joseph in the pit, in slavery, in prison. But for the first time, she saw what Joseph was doing while he was in those situations. He never stopped being who he was. He never stopped exercising his gift. He never stopped serving with excellence even when there was no visible reward. Sylvia went home and did something simple but radical. Instead of spending the next few hours sending more resumes out of desperation, she picked up a notebook and wrote, in vivid detail, everything she loved doing. Everything she naturally did well. Everything that made time pass without her noticing. And at the bottom of the page, she wrote a prayer. Not a list of requests. A declaration of identity. I am the professional that God created to solve complex problems, lead teams, and build systems that work. That is my identity. That is my reality. Regardless of what the market says today, Over the next 3 months, something began to change. Not dramatically at first, but Sylvia began to communicate differently in interviews. She was no longer begging for an opportunity. She was presenting a solution, and the energy of that distinction was palpable to everyone who interviewed her. 6 months after the layoff, Sylvia was hired for a position that paid 40% more than her previous salary at a company aligned with her deepest values. The turning point did not happen when she found the right job. The turning point happened when she became the right person. And this is exactly where I want to pause to talk about something that has been transforming the lives of thousands of people who, just like Sylvia, were looking for a way to integrate spirituality with practical manifestation in their professional life. There is a resource that brings together, in a deep and applied way, the biblical principles of abundance and connects them with the universal laws of manifestation. The ebook Attract Divine Abundance. It is not a book of quick fixes. It is an inner transformation guide that helps you unlock the belief patterns that are preventing you from receiving what God has already reserved for you. It is available right now in the first pinned comment below and also in the QR code that appears on screen. If you feel you have reached a point where you need to go deeper on this journey, this material was made for you. Returning to Joseph's journey, there is a moment that I consider the most revealing in the entire narrative. Joseph had been in prison for 2 years. 2 years. And during that time, he interpreted the dreams of 2 of Pharaoh's officials who had been in prison. For one of them, the chief butler, the interpretation was positive. He would be restored to his position. Joseph asked for only one thing in return. In Genesis chapter 40 verse 14 in the King James Version, he says, "But think on me, when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house." And then one of the most painful sentences in all of the Bible occurs at verse 23. "Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him." 2 years. 2 long years of waiting after a promise that was not kept. If you have ever waited for a promotion that never came, if you have ever trusted someone who could have opened a door for you and that person simply did not, if you have ever felt that even your best actions were forgotten, then you know the bitter taste of those 2 years of Joseph. But here is what the narrative teaches us. The butler forgot Joseph, but God did not forget him. And the butler's forgetfulness was exactly what positioned Joseph for a moment that no human connection could have created. When Pharaoh had a troubling dream that none of his wise men and magicians could interpret, the chief butler finally remembered Joseph. Not because he wanted to, because he was moved by a force beyond his own will. In Genesis chapter 44, verses 9 through 13, he told Pharaoh about the young Hebrew who had interpreted his dreams in prison with absolute accuracy. And then something happened that only God could orchestrate. The slave, the prisoner, the forgotten one, was called directly to the palace of the most powerful man in the known world. And Joseph was not unprepared. 2 years in prison had been 2 years of refinement, 2 years of deepening of his character, 2 years of intimacy with God that no university could have provided. When Joseph entered Pharaoh's presence, he was not merely a dream interpreter. He was a man formed by the process. Genesis chapter 41, verse 38. In the King James Version records Pharaoh's reaction. "And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is?" Pharaoh, a man who did not know the God of Israel, who worshipped Egyptian deities, recognized something in Joseph that went beyond human abilities. He recognized a presence, an anointing, an authority that did not come from certificates or connections, but from an intimacy cultivated with the divine during the darkest moments of the journey. And that is why at verse 41, Pharaoh said, "See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt, from the pit to the palace, from prison to power, from being forgotten to the second most important position in the world." Not because Joseph had sent the right resume, not because he had made the right connections on LinkedIn, but because he had cultivated, in every phase of the process, an identity aligned with the calling that God had deposited in him before he was even born. Now I want to ask you a question that may be uncomfortable. When you think about the job of your dreams, the position, the salary, the purpose, the impact, what is the dominant emotion that accompanies that thought? If it is anxiety, urgency, or desperation, there is something fundamental that needs to change before any career strategy will work. Because anxiety and desperation are frequencies that repel opportunities. They communicate to the universe and to the people around you that you are operating from scarcity, not from abundance. And scarcity attracts more scarcity. This is not vague mysticism. It is physics. When you operate from the fear of not making it, your nervous system activates survival mode. Your brain literally becomes less creative. You make worse decisions. You communicate less convincingly. You transmit non-verbally, the energy of someone asking for rescue instead of someone offering value. Faith, in the deepest sense, is the antidote to that anxiety. It is what allows you to act with urgency without operating from desperation. It is what allows you to be strategic without being desperate. It is what Philippians chapter 4 verse 7 in the King James Version describes as the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. There is a crucial difference between asking and declaring, between pleading and affirming, between begging and manifesting. Most people pray for a job the same way a child cries for food, from a place of need, of lack, of passive dependence, and there is nothing wrong with acknowledging your need before God. But there is a higher level of prayer that the great biblical figures operated in, a prayer that does not ask with doubt, but declares with certainty. When God said to Abram in Genesis chapter 17 verse 5 in the King James Version, "Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For a father of many nations have I made thee." He was not making a conditional promise. He was declaring a reality that already existed in the spiritual plane and needed to manifest in the physical plane. And Abraham, who was 100 years old with a barren wife, did not laugh in unbelief. And he believed in the Lord, and he counted it to him for righteousness, as Genesis chapter 15, verse 6 in the King James Version. Abraham did not wait for evidence before believing. He believed, and the evidence came. This is what I want you to practice today in relation to the job of your dreams. Not the prayer of desperate pleading, but the grounded declaration of faith. Not, "Lord, please give me a job," although there is nothing wrong with that request, but rather, "Lord, I receive now by faith the position you have already prepared for me. I align myself with it. I prepare for it. I receive it with anticipatory gratitude." There is a supernatural force in anticipatory gratitude. When you give thanks for something you have not yet seen, you are exercising the highest principle of faith. You are saying to the universe, "I trust so deeply in the integrity of God that I am already giving thanks before the delivery." And that level of faith, that radical certainty, is what moves mountains. It is what unlocks doors that seem permanently closed. It is what causes the chief butler to remember you at exactly the right moment. Let us talk about something practical. Faith without works is dead, as James chapter 2 verse 17 in the King James Version says. And that means that the manifestation of the job of your dreams requires a combination of two elements that many people erroneously separate: the inner spiritual faith and the outer strategic action. Joseph did not sit in prison waiting for Pharaoh to appear magically. He continued to exercise his gift within the limitations of his circumstances. When he had the opportunity to interpret dreams, he did so with excellence. When he could serve, he served with integrity. When he could demonstrate his character, he demonstrated it. Genuine faith always produces movement, not the frantic and desperate movement of someone who does not trust God, but the fluid, strategic and confident movement of someone who knows they are walking in the direction of their destiny. So what are the faith actions you need to take today in relation to the job of your dreams? First, clarity of identity. Before any resume, before any interview, you need to know with absolute clarity who you are in the kingdom of God. Not who the job market says you are. Not who your last position defined you to be, but who God says you are. Jeremiah chapter 1, verse 5 in the King James Version says, "Before I formed thee in the belly I knew thee, and before thou camest forth out of the womb I sanctified thee, and I ordained thee a prophet unto the nations." If God said that to Jeremiah, He has an equivalent word of purpose for your professional life. Finding that word, whether through prayer, through meditation on the word, through contemplative silence is the foundation of everything. Second, vibrational alignment. This is what quantum science calls cardiac coherence. It is the state in which your mind and your heart are aligned on the same frequency. When you think about the job of your dreams with anxiety, your mind and your heart are in conflict. The mind projects the desire, the heart feels the fear. This creates incoherence, and incoherence does not manifest. To create coherence, you need practices that harmonize mind and heart. Deep gratitude is one of them. Contemplative prayer is another. Meditation on the Word of God is perhaps the most powerful of all. When you roll the promises of God around in your mind repeatedly until they descend from the intellectual level to the level of the heart, you reach the state of coherence that the law of attraction requires to operate fully. Third, consistent excellence in the present. Joseph was excellent in Potiphar's house before going to prison. He was excellent in prison before going to the palace. He did not save his excellence for when the circumstances would be better. He exercised his gift in every context where he found himself. And that is what created the invisible reputation that preceded him when he arrived at the palace. Your excellence today, in your current job, even if it is not the ideal one, in your freelance work, in your business, in the service you render to your community, is building a spiritual and human reputation that will open doors you cannot yet see. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23, in the King James Version says, "And whatsoever ye do, do it heartily, as to the Lord, and not unto men." That is the mindset that transforms ordinary work into sacred offering, and sacred offerings are always rewarded. Fourth, a network of relationships fueled by genuine generosity. Most people approach networking transactionally. What can this person do for me? But the Bible presents a different principle. Proverbs chapter 11 verses 24 and 25 in the King James Version declares, "There is that scattereth, and yet increaseth, and there is that withholdeth more than is meet, but it tendeth to poverty. The liberal soul shall be made fat, and he that watereth shall be watered also himself." When you genuinely contribute to the journey of other people, sharing knowledge, connecting people, offering support without a hidden agenda, you activate the principle of sowing and reaping in a professional field. The connections that lead to the job of your dreams are almost never the ones you are directly pursuing. They are the ones that arise as a side effect of your consistent generosity. Fifth, radical patience. This is the hardest part. Joseph waited years, not weeks. And in the culture of speed in which we live, where we expect instant results from everything, patience has become a nearly extinct virtue. But there is something that happens in the waiting period that does not happen at any other moment. The formation of character. Joseph's 2 years in prison were not a waste of time. They were the 2 most formative years of his life. The identity he built during that dark period was exactly what enabled him to sustain the weight of power when it finally arrived. Hebrews chapter 6, verse 12, in the King James Version, instructs us to follow those who through faith and patience inherit the promises. Faith and patience. The two always appear together in biblical promises, because faith without patience is merely desire, and patience without faith is merely resignation. But when the two combine, they create an unstoppable force. Now I want to reveal the secret I promised at the beginning of this video. That secret hidden in the oldest pages in the world that separates those who manifest the job of their dreams from those who spend years stagnant. It is found in Genesis chapter 44 verse 16 in the King James Version. When Pharaoh told Joseph that he had heard he could interpret dreams, Joseph answered, "It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace." This is the key. This is the turning point. Joseph knew who he was. He had absolute clarity about his gift and his purpose. But he knew that the source of his gift was not himself. It was God. And for that reason, he did not carry the weight of having to create the opportunities. He carried only the responsibility of preparing himself and remaining connected to the source. The secret is not having more skills. It is not having more connections. It is not having more degrees. The secret is this position of radical humility combined with absolute confidence. Humility to recognize that you do not create the opportunities, you receive them. Confidence to know that God is active in your story, orchestrating every detail, even when you cannot see the complete picture. There is a concept in quantum physics called non-locality, discovered by John Bell in 1964 and confirmed experimentally many times since then. It demonstrates that two particles that have been in contact remain connected regardless of the distance that separates them. A change in one particle instantly affects the other, even if they are light years apart. This violates our intuitive understanding of space and time. And here is what this means for you. At the moment you made the decision to live in purpose, at the moment you said yes to God's calling for your life, you were connected in a non-local way with all the people, opportunities, and resources that are part of the path to your destiny. They already exist. They are already in motion toward you. The question is not whether they will arrive. The question is whether you will be receptive when they do. And receptivity is created by faith, by that inner state of quiet certainty that says it is done before any visible evidence. Let me tell you about a man named Paul. Not the Apostle Paul, a contemporary man of 47 years who had worked as an engineer at a multinational company for 18 years. When the company was acquired by a larger conglomerate, Paul was one of the thousands who received a layoff letter. With 2 kids in high school and a wife who had just started her own business, the weight of the situation was concrete and urgent. Paul went to the internet, as most people do, looking for quick answers. He found content about the law of attraction. He started doing the practices, vision boards, affirmations, visualization. But inside, there was a voice questioning everything. Is this of God? Am I going against my faith? The tension between the desire to manifest and the concern about practicing something contrary to his Christian faith created an internal block that neutralized every practice he tried. It was then that Paul decided to investigate deeply. He started studying the Bible through a different lens. He read about Abraham, who believed in something impossible and became the father of nations. He read about Joseph. He read about David, who was anointed king years before sitting on the throne. He read about Jesus' promises in Mark chapter 11, verse 24, in the King James Version. Therefore I say unto you, what things soever ye desire, when ye pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. Paul had a revelation. The law of attraction was not an alternative to biblical faith. It was an incomplete description of a principle that the Bible had established centuries before. And when he integrated these two perspectives, the spiritual practice with the biblical foundation, something unlocked. Within 4 months, Paul received 3 simultaneous job offers. He chose the one most aligned with his values. And today he leads an entire division with a team of 80 people doing the most meaningful work of his career. Paul's story is not an accident. It is a pattern. It is the pattern that happens when genuine faith, rooted in the Word, integrated with universal principles, expressed in consistent actions, enters into full operation. And the question that remains is, what is stopping you from entering that pattern? In most cases, it is not lack of talent. It is not lack of opportunities. It is a set of deeply rooted limiting beliefs that function as an invisible force field repelling the opportunities that God is sending. Beliefs like, I am not qualified enough. My age is an obstacle. The market is too competitive. I have tried many times, and it has not worked. God blesses others, but with me it is different. Each one of those beliefs is a lie. And the Bible has a word for lies that operate in the human mind. In John chapter 8, verse 44, in the King James Version, Jesus describes the adversary as a liar and the father of it. The voices that tell you the job of your dreams is not for you do not come from God. They come from an adversary who knows what happens when you discover who you truly are. How do you dismantle those beliefs? With what Paul called the renewing of the mind in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, in the King James Version. And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. The original Greek word for transformed is metamorpho, from which the word metamorphosis comes. Paul is describing a transformation as radical as that of a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. A transformation that begins not in the job market, not in external circumstances, but in the way of thinking. This is the inner work. It is the most difficult work that exists. And it is the work that most people avoid because they prefer to change the external rather than transform the internal. But it is exactly this work that creates the results that look miraculous to those who observe from the outside. Practically speaking, the renewing of the mind in relation to the job of your dreams begins with a daily practice of immersion in the identity that God declares over you. Not the identity that the market assigns, not the identity that your past mistakes defined, the eternal identity declared by the one who created you. Isaiah chapter 43 verses 1 and 2 in the King James Version says, "But now thus saith the Lord that created thee, O Jacob, and he that formed thee, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee, I have called thee by thy name, thou art mine. When thou passest through the waters I will be with thee, and through the rivers they shall not overflow thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned." That is the God who is in your professional story. That is the God who is present in the layoff, in the rejection, in the waiting, not as a distant observer, but as an active participant who is using every experience to form in you the version that can sustain the blessing that is on its way. There is one last thing I need to say before closing. There's an enormous temptation when we are in periods of professional waiting to shrink our dream, to say, maybe I am asking for too much. Maybe I need to be more realistic. And that shrinking looks like humility, but it is actually unbelief in disguise. Genuine humility before God does not reduce the size of the dream, it transfers the responsibility of accomplishing it from you to Him. Ephesians chapter 3 verse 20 in the King James Version declares, "Now unto Him that is able to do exceeding abundantly, above all that we ask or think, according to the power that worketh in us." Exceeding abundantly above, not a little more, not reasonably more, exceeding abundantly above all that you can ask or imagine. That means the job of your dreams that you are visualizing, that seems too big for you, may be, from God's perspective, only the beginning. It may be only the first step of a trajectory of influence and impact that goes beyond what your mind can conceive today. So the final question is, will you believe this? Not as an intellectual exercise, not as a superficial belief that disappears when rejection comes, but as a foundational certainty that remains unshakable when circumstances say otherwise. That is what separates those who manifest the job of their dreams from those who remain in the same position year after year. It is not talent. It is not luck. It is faith, the faith that works like a magnet, the faith that puts your name in the memory of the chief butler at exactly the right time, the faith that takes you from the pit to the palace, the faith that causes Pharaoh to say about you, "Can we find such a one as this is, a man in whom the Spirit of God is?" Joseph went from prison to palace in a single day. What took years was not the change of circumstances. It was the formation of the character that could sustain the circumstances when they changed. And God is doing the same thing in you right now. Every day of waiting is not lost time. It is preparation for the weight of the blessing. Every rejection is not a closed door. It is a redirection toward the right door. Every moment of doubt that you overcome does not weaken your faith. It strengthens it. You are being formed. You are being prepared. And when your Joseph moment arrives in your story, and it will arrive, you will look back and understand that every step of the way was necessary. Every difficulty was formative. Every period of waiting was sacred. The job of your dreams is not a random destination that some people are lucky enough to reach. It is the point of convergence between the purpose that God deposited in you before you were born and the faith you have cultivated throughout the journey. You do not need to force that destination. You need to become the person who can inhabit it. And that transformation, that metamorphosis from the inside out, begins today. It begins with the decision to abandon the identity of scarcity and embrace the identity of divine abundance. It begins with a prayer that does not ask with doubt, but declares with certainty. It begins with the first step of action taken not from fear, but from faith. It begins now, with you, with this moment, with this choice.